All right, let's dive into a really crucial piece of legislation today, the Charter Act of 1833. Now, this wasn't just some minor update. It was a huge moment that fundamentally reshaped the governance of British India, pushing it towards a highly centralized system. So let's get right to it.
You know, if you want to understand the Charter Act of 1833, you really only need to remember one key theme: centralization. I mean it. This act was pretty much the final, most decisive step in creating one single unified British administration in India. And as we'll see, every single provision we talk about today points right back to that main idea.
And let me be very clear for all you UPSC aspirants out there. This topic is absolutely non-negotiable. It's what we call a high-yield topic. You're going to see questions on its provisions and its impact pop up again and again in both prelims and mains. So paying close attention right now is definitely going to pay off.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with the Act's core purpose. Then we'll look at the forces that shaped it. After that, we'll get into the details of its 6 key provisions, look at the impact and consequences, compare it to some other key acts, and finish up with a quick recap for your exams. A nice, logical flow.
All right, first up, the Act's core purpose. Let's really get to the bottom of what this legislation was actually designed to do.
So, the Charter Act of 1833, and you might also see it called the St. Helena Act, had one main job, and that was to completely change what the East India Company was. It basically ended the company's life as a trading business and turned it into a purely administrative body. From this point on, its only job was to govern India on behalf of the British Crown. This was the masterstroke for centralizing all that power.
And here is your first big memory anchor. This is super important. If you walk away with just one thing, let it be this. 1833 equals centralize plus codify. Centralize the administration and codify the laws. Just lock that formula in your head. It'll be a lifesaver in the exam hall.
Okay, but a massive act like this doesn't just happen out of nowhere, right? So let's take a look at the forces that were shaping it. The powerful ideas and economic pressures back in Britain that actually led to its creation.
So there were really 3 big things going on. First, you had the Whigs, the Liberals, who were gaining a lot of influence in the British Parliament and were all about reform. Second, this new philosophy called utilitarianism from thinkers like Jeremy Bentham was becoming super popular. The whole idea was about making government more efficient, and they thought the best way to do that was with centralized, uniform laws. And third, you can't forget the Industrial Revolution. It was creating this huge demand from British factory owners who wanted to sell their goods in India, and to do that, they needed to get rid of the East India Company's last remaining monopolies for good.
All right, now let's get into the real meat of it, the stuff you absolutely need to know for the exam, the 6 key provisions of the Act. We're going to go through them one by one.
First up, and you could argue this is the most important one, is the absolute peak of centralization. The old title, Governor General of Bengal, well, it was gone. It was replaced with the new, much more powerful title, Governor General of India. And the very first person to hold this new office was Lord William Bentinck. But listen, this wasn't just a simple name change. The new Governor General of India was given complete civil and military power over all of British India.
And here's a key recall phrase for you to remember. For the first time, a single entity, the Government of India, had authority over the entire territorial area that the British controlled. That had literally never happened before. It was a massive consolidation of power.
This centralization didn't stop with just titles. It went right to the heart of lawmaking. The governors of Bombay and Madras, they were stripped of their legislative powers completely. From this point on, only the Governor General of India and his council had the exclusive power to make laws for all of British India. This marks a really clear shift. Even the name changed. Laws made under this new system were called acts, not regulations like they used to be.
So, think about the huge transformation the East India Company went through. Before 1833, it was still a trading company, right? It was holding on to its very profitable monopoly on tea and the China trade. But then the Charter Act of 1833 comes along and boom, its entire identity changes. It's no longer a commercial body at all. It is now a purely administrative one. Its only job is to govern. Its trading days were officially over.
Now, to manage all these new, centralized law-making duties, a new person was added to the Governor General's Council. A 4th member, known as the Law Member, was brought in specifically for legislative matters. And the Act also laid the groundwork for an Indian Law Commission, which was given the massive, and I mean massive, task of codifying all of India's laws.
And this leads us to a classic question.
In fact, UPSC often asks this one directly. So who was the first law member appointed under this act? Think about it for a second.
The answer, of course, is Lord T.B. Macaulay. That's a name you absolutely have to know for prelims.
And this gives us our second memory anchor. It's a great way to see the chain of events. Just remember this sequence. Macaulay becomes the law member, that leads to the Indian Law Commission, which ultimately gives us foundational legal codes like the Indian Penal Code, the IPC. It's a straight line, Macaulay to Law Commission to IPC.
Okay, just two more key provisions to cover. First, the Act actually tried to introduce an open competition for the civil services. It said that Indians shouldn't be blocked from holding any office. But, and you need to remember this distinction clearly, this part of the Act was shot down. The company's court of directors opposed it so strongly that it was negated. So it was an attempt, but it failed. The second thing is that the Act directed the government to abolish slavery, and that goal was finally achieved a decade later in 1843.
So we've gone through all the provisions. Now let's take a step back and analyze the bigger picture. What was the long-term impact of all this? How did this act really change how India was governed?
When we analyze it critically, we can see the impact in three main areas. First, in administration, it created what's called a unitary government. The provinces basically became just administrative units, taking orders from the center. Second, in the legal system, it kicked off that whole process of codification we talked about, which led to a uniform legal system for the country. And third, financially, all the power was pulled to the center. The governor-general controlled the money, and the provincial governments had pretty much no financial independence.
Okay, now for something that's a really important skill for your mains exam, comparing and contrasting. You have to be able to place the 1833 Act in context with the other big charter acts.
Looking at this progression really helps. See, in 1813, the East India Company's monopoly was only partially ended. Then comes our Act, 1833, which brought a total end to its monopoly. Then if you look ahead to 1853, that's when the open competition for civil services, the same idea that failed back in 1833, was finally implemented successfully. Seeing that logical flow from partial to total to a new system is so important for writing good mains answers.
All right, let's wrap this all up. We're going to consolidate everything with a final, high-yield recap that's perfect for quick revision before your exam.
Okay, let's hit the key points one last time. First Governor-General of India, Lord William Bentinck. The East India Company's new status, purely administrative. Its trade monopoly, completely gone. Legislative power, centralized, with Bombay and Madras losing theirs. The new council member, the law member, Macaulay. Civil services reform, it was attempted, but it failed. And finally, slavery, the act directed it to be abolished, which was done in 1843. Got it?
And that wraps up our detailed look at the Charter Act of 1833. Now, to really make sure all of this sticks, I strongly recommend you visit the link in the description. You'll find high-yield notes and some great quick revision mind maps that we put together just for your preparation. Thanks for joining me.